The Vorthak war fleet hung in the void like a cluster of serrated blades, their silver-purple hulls drinking in the distant starlight. Each vessel pulsed with the harsh glow of military-grade energy cores, their brutalist architecture designed for one purpose: annihilation. High Commander Vorgel stood on the observation deck of the Blade of Final Dawn, his armored fingers curling around the railing. His chitinous plates vibrated with suppressed fury as the tactical display before him painted the inevitable. The last of the Kessari homeworld's orbital defenses crumbled under the relentless bombardment, their elegant spires collapsing into molten ruin. The Kessari had been a gentle species, artisans, philosophers, pacifists, who had once believed in the sanctity of diplomacy. Now, their cities burned, their fleets were scrap, and their so-called allies had abandoned them to the Vorthak's mercy. A low hum resonated through the deck as Gromnock, his chief scientist, approached. The scholar's violet ocular implants flickered with data streams, his voice a measured rasp. "The Kessari are broadcasting." Vorgel's mandibles twitched. A final plea. Then, desperation from a dying race. He had seen it before. The last gasps of civilizations who realized too late that the universe was not kind to the weak. "Let me hear it," he commanded. The comm system crackled to life, and a voice, soft, trembling, yet defiant, filled the chamber. "This is High Scholar Yelna of the Kessari Concord. To any who hear this, we beg for aid. Our people face extinction, our allies have forsaken us. If there is mercy left in this galaxy, help us." Silence followed. Then static. Vorgel exhaled through his ventral vents. "Pathetic. Shut it off." Gromnock hesitated. "Commander, the broadcast is not just a known space. It is being transmitted on an old frequency, one not used in centuries." Vorgel's spine stiffened. "Irrelevant. The Kessari are finished. No one is coming for them." But as the words left him, something cold slithered down his carapace, because the frequency the Kessari had used was human. Deep in the Sol system, aboard the UEF battleship Resolute, Commander Rachel Anderson jolted awake as the alert klaxon blared through her quarters. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a bloody hue. She was on her feet before her mind fully registered the urgency. Muscle memory from 2 decades of service kicking in. The neural interface in her temple buzzed as the ship's AI fed her the alert directly. Priority transmission received. Origin, Kessari homeworld. Classification, distress. Her blood turned to ice. The Kessari, the ones who saved us. Memories flashed, decades ago, when humanity had been young and stumbling into the stars. A lone Kessari research vessel had stumbled upon a crippled human colony ship adrift in the void. The Kessari had given them food, medicine, and coordinates to the nearest habitable world. They had asked for nothing in return. Now, they were screaming for help, Rachel's fingers clenched into fists. "Get me a direct line to High Command," she growled. "And wake Corporal Harriman, tell him we're going to war, because humanity did not forget its debts. And this one would be paid in blood." The Kessari transmission burned through the void like a dying star's last scream. Commander Rachel Anderson stood in the dim glow of the Aegis Dawn's command deck, the holographic projection of the message flickering before her. The Kessari's delicate, avian, like features were twisted in desperation, their usually vibrant plumage dulled by exhaustion and fear. Their words were fragmented, their language strained through a failing translation matrix, but the meaning was unmistakable. "The Vorthak have come. They burn our cities. They slaughter our children. Our allies have abandoned us. We beg. Any who hear this, help us." Rachel's jaw tightened. The Kessari had never been warriors. Their civilization was built on philosophy, on art, on the quiet study of the cosmos. They had no standing army, no fleet of warships, only a handful of lightly armed patrol vessels meant to deter pirates. And now, the Vorthak, a species whose name alone sent shivers through the spines of even the most hardened mercenaries, had come for them. The Vorthak were conquerors, Their empire was a sprawling monstrosity of brutal efficiency, their technology forged in the fires of endless war. Their ships were angular, predatory things, armored in dark steel and pulsing with violet energy cores. Their weapons didn't just kill, they erased, and they had decided the Kessari were next. Rachel turned to the comms officer. Status on High Command's response. The officer hesitated. There, deliberating. Rachel's fingers twitched. Deliberating, she knew what that meant. The human fleet was stretched thin. Colonies to protect, trade routes to secure. The political calculus of war was never simple. But this wasn't just politics. This was debt. A chime sounded as Corporal Richard Harriman entered the bridge, his cybernetic eye flickering as it adjusted to the dim light. He took one look at the transmission, at Rachel's expression, and exhaled sharply. "They're really doing it, huh?" he muttered, "leaving them to die." Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to because she already knew what she was going to do. On the other side of the galaxy, aboard the Vorthak command vessel Harbinger's Wrath, High Commander Vorgol studied the tactical display with cold satisfaction. The Kessari homeworld burned beneath his fleets. Guns, their orbital defenses had been laughable, pitiful energy shields that shattered under the first barrage. Their few defensive platforms, torn apart by precision railgun fire. Gromnock, his chief scientist, stood beside him, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back. "Their surrender is imminent," he observed. "Their last transmission was a plea for aid. No one will answer." Vorgol's mandibles twitched in amusement. "Of course not. The Kessari have no allies. No one risks war with us for the sake of philosophers." Gromnock nodded. The galaxy had long since learned the price of defiance. The Vorthak did not accept surrender. They did not negotiate. They consumed, a flicker on the edge of the sensor grid. Vorgol's head snapped toward the display as an alert pulsed through the ship's neural net. "Unknown vessel, emerging from slipspace," Gromnock frowned. "A scavenger, some fool mercenary hoping to loot the ruins?" But Vorgol's instincts screamed otherwise. Because the ship that tore into real space was human, and it was not alone. The Aegis Dawn hung in the void like a blade unsheathed, flanked by a dozen more vessels, each one bristling with weapons that had no business being on a species so young. Rachel's voice crackled across the comms, her words sharp as a vibro. "Blade. Vorthak Fleet. This is Commander Rachel Anderson of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You will withdraw from Kessari space immediately." Vorgol stared. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. Humans. Pathetic humans. They had barely stepped into the stars, and now they thought to command him. Gromnock, however, did not laugh because he was reading the scans. And what he saw made his blood run cold. The human ships were not just armed. They were built for this. The silence on the Vorthak command deck was absolute. Gromnock's claws hovered over the tactical display, the holographic readouts painting his face in flickering silver. Purple, the data streamed in, cold, relentless, undeniable. The human ships were not just armed. They were wrong. Every line of their construction defied Vorthak doctrine. No sleek, predatory curves like the warships of the Dominion. No elegant energy, efficient weapon arrays. Instead, the Aegis Dawn and its escorts were brutal, angular, reinforced, layered with armor plating thick enough to shrug off direct hits from a plasma lance. Their weapon ports were oversized, their reactor signatures erratic, their hulls studded with secondary systems that made no sense. Gromnock's neural tendrils twitched as he parsed the readings. A Vorthak warship was a precision instrument, every component optimized for maximum efficiency. But these human vessels, they were overbuilt, like they expected to be torn apart and still keep fighting. And then there were the weapons. Not just railguns, not just plasma cannons. The humans had strapped primitive fusion warheads to their torpedoes. Gromnock's breath caught. That wasn't just reckless. It was insane. Fusion warheads were crude, unstable. The kind of weapon the Dominion had abandoned centuries ago. Too messy, too indiscriminate, yet here they were, mounted on human ships like badges of honor. And then the scans reached the Aegis Dawn's core. Gromnock's blood turned to ice. The reactor wasn't Vorthak, wasn't Dominion, wasn't anything he recognized. It pulsed like a dying star, its energy signature jagged, uneven, as if the humans had taken a stable singularity drive and forced it to burn hotter, faster, harder. They're overclocking their own power core. A whisper of horror slithered through his mind. That wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. Vorgil, meanwhile, saw none of this. He saw only insolence. Humans dared to issue him an ultimatum. His mandibles flexed in a predator's grin. Open fire. The order was a growl laced with contempt. His gunners obeyed without hesitation. Silver-purple energy lanced across the void. The Vorthak fleet's plasma batteries unleashing a volley that would have crippled a Dominion cruiser in seconds. The human ships tanked it, not with shields, with armor. Gromnock's claws dug into the console as the tactical feed updated. The Aegis Dawn had taken the hit head, on its hull scorched, its outer layers vaporized, but its core systems unbroken. And then it fired back, not with precision, not with elegance, but with volume. A storm of projectiles, plasma bursts, and those damned fusion warheads streaked toward the Vorthak line. The impacts were deafening, even in the vacuum. The explosions rippling across the lead destroyer's shields like a hammer against glass. Vorgil's grin faltered, because the human ships weren't just surviving. They were closing the distance, their engines burned at fake capacity, their hulls shuddering under the strain, as if the humans didn't care if their ships tore themselves apart. Gromnock finally found his voice. "High Commander." Vorgil didn't let him finish. The second volley tore into the human formation. This time, one of the escorts detonated, its overstressed reactor going critical in a blaze of white-hot fury. The humans didn't slow down, if anything. They accelerated. A new signal flickered on the scanners. Something was launching from the Aegis Dawn. Not missiles, not drones. Gromnock's neural tendrils went rigid. The humans weren't just fighting, they were boarding. On the Aegis Dawn's bridge, Rachel Anderson watched the tactical feed with cold satisfaction. The Vorthak thought in terms of efficiency. Of acceptable losses, humanity had learned a different calculus. You don't win by outsmarting the enemy. You win by making them bleed for every inch. Her fingers tightened around the command console. "Corporal Harriman." A voice crackled back, calm, steady, eager. "Ready when you are, Commander." Rachel smiled. "Give them hell." The drop pods ignited their thrusters, and the void burned. The drop pods streaked through the void like falling stars, their thrusters carving jagged trails of superheated plasma through the black. The Vorthak dreadnought Silverspike loomed ahead, a fortress of dark steel and violet energy, its hull bristling with weapon emplacements that now swiveled in frantic, panicked arcs. Inside the lead pod, Corporal Richard Harriman exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the inside of his visor. The inertial dampeners groaned as the pod adjusted trajectory, avoiding a last-ditch flurry of point defense fire. His HUD flickered, distance to target. Fey meters. The Vorthak had never faced boarding actions before. They were about to learn why that was a mistake. On the bridge of the Silverspike, High Commander Vorgil watched the incoming pods with a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. His neural interface pulsed with damage reports. Entire sections of his ship were already venting atmosphere, their structural integrity compromised by the human warship's relentless barrage. This was not how battles were fought. The Vorthak waged war with precision, with calculation. They dismantled enemies from a distance, reducing them to scrap before they could ever close the gap. But the humans charged. Seal the ventral corridors. Vorgil barked, his voice a guttural snarl. Activate internal defense turrets. They will not. The ship shuddered, not from an impact. From something burrowing into the hull, Harriman's pod struck like a meteor. its reinforced nose shearing through armor plating as if it were wet paper. The moment it anchored, explosive bolts detonated, blasting the hatch open in a storm of shrapnel. His boots hit the deck before the smoke had even cleared, his rifle already sweeping the corridor. The Vorthak were waiting. Their silver-purple combat armor glinted under the emergency lights. Their elongated limbs coiled in readiness. They moved with eerie, predatory grace, aliens built for war, honed by centuries of conquest. Harriman didn't hesitate. The first pulse, round struck a Vorthak square in the chest, its hyper-accelerated tungsten core punching straight through armor, flesh, and the bulkhead behind it. The alien staggered, its 4 eyes widening in shock. Just before the round detonated, shredding its torso in a spray of violet, tinged blood. The other Vorthak froze. They hadn't expected that. Harriman grinned behind his helmet. "Welcome to close quarters," he muttered, and charged. Gromnock, the Silver Spike's chief scientist, watched the carnage unfold through the ship's internal sensors. His neural tendrils twitched in frantic, disbelieving patterns as human soldiers. So few of them. How were they doing this? Ripped through deck after deck. They fought like animals. They fought like humans. Gromnock had studied their history. He knew of their wars, their revolutions, their capacity for brutality when cornered. But seeing it firsthand, a proximity alert shrieked in his skull. Something was outside the lab door. Rachel Anderson watched the boarding action unfold from the Aegis Dawn's bridge, her fingers drumming a slow, rhythmic beat against the armrest of her command chair. The Vorthak had numbers, they had superior technology, but they didn't have this. The willingness to crawl through hell just to spit in the devil's eye. A new alert chimed. Harriman's squad had breached the reactor core. Rachel leaned forward. "Time to show them why we don't lose," she whispered. Outside, the void burned, the lab door buckled. Gromnock's neural tendrils coiled tight, his violet ocular membranes dilating in the dim silver, purple glow of emergency lighting. The Vorthak scientist had spent cycles studying lesser species, their weaknesses, their predictable patterns of fear and submission. But this was wrong. The humans should have broken by now. The door shrieked as something pushed against it from the other side. Not the steady, mechanical force of a plasma cutter, but something alive. Something that should not have been able to move after the neurotoxin bombardment his security drones had unleashed. A fist-sized dent erupted in the alloy. Then another. Gromnock's secondary heart stuttered. He had seen the scans of human physiology. Their bones should have shattered under that strain. Their muscles should have torn. But the door kept bending, warping inward in jagged, unnatural increments, as if something on the other side was reshaping the metal through sheer, unfiltered will. Then silence, a single shuddering breath, echoed through the lab's ventilation system. Gromnock's claws flexed against the console, his mind racing through tactical permutations. He had protocols for this. He had plans. The Vorthak Dominion had never lost a boarding action in 700 cycles of conquest. The door split down the middle, not melted, not cut, and through the gap stepped a nightmare. Corporal Richard Harriman exhaled through his teeth, the taste of blood and burnt metal thick on his tongue. His armor was a ruin, half the plating slagged from plasma fire. The undersuit seared where neurotoxins had eaten through the seals. His left arm hung limp. The bones inside, pulverized from when head punched through the last bulkhead, didn't matter. He could still move. The lab beyond was a cathedral of cold, brutalist Vorthak design, gleaming gunmetal surfaces etched with violet energy channels, consoles humming with that eerie silver-purple light. And in the center of it all, a single alien scientist, his spined crest flaring in something that wasn't quite fear. Harriman took a step forward, his boot crunched on shattered debris. The alien Gromnock, his HUD supplied, jerked back, claws flexing toward a sidearm. Harriman didn't stop. He didn't speak. He just walked, one foot in front of the other, his breath ragged but steady, his good hand curling into a fist. Gromnock's ocular membranes flickered, his neural tendrils lashed in frantic denial. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Humans were fragile. Humans broke. But the thing advancing on him didn't look like it knew how to break. It looked like it knew how to kill. On the bridge of the Aegis Dawn, Rachel Anderson watched the reactor core's status flicker from secured to breached. A slow, feral smile curled her lips. The Vorthak thought they were losing a battle. They were wrong. They were losing everything. Outside, the void burned brighter. Section Fey. The Dominion's smile. The void burned, but not with the clean silver-purple fire of Vorthak weaponry. This was something else. Something hungry. Commander Rachel Anderson watched the tactical display as the Aegis Dawn's reactor breach propagated through the Vorthak command ship like a virus. The alien vessel's armored hull, forged from dark steel alloys and layered with violet energy dampeners, buckled inward as if crushed by an invisible fist. Secondary explosions rippled along its spine, each detonation a blossom of white-hot fury against the black. The Vorthak had built their warships to endure. They had not built them to endure this. On the view screen, the enemy flagship Central Spire, a brutalist monument to military efficiency. Listed to port, its structural integrity collapsing in slow, shuddering waves. Anderson exhaled, her fingers tightening around the armrests of her command chair. The leather creaked under her grip. She had seen this before. Not in battle, not in war, in hospitals. The way the Vorthak ship died reminded her of a human body succumbing to sepsis. Systems failing one by one, the collapse inevitable once the infection took root. The reactor breach had been the first organ to go. Now the rest followed. A flicker of movement on the display caught her eye. Escape pods, dozens of them, bursting from the dying ship in erratic clusters. Their thrusters burned the same harsh silver, purple as the Vorthak's weapons, but there was no order to their retreat. No formation, only panic. Anderson's smile didn't waver. Behind her, Lieutenant Cho murmured, "They're abandoning ship." "Not all of them," Anderson said. She was right. The bridge shuddered as the Aegis Dawn's point. Defense turrets swiveled, tracking the fleeing pods for a heartbeat. The gunnery crew hesitated, human instinct warring with protocol. Then the order came, crisp and unflinching. From the tactical officer, fire at will. The turrets spat tungsten slugs at relativistic speeds. Pods shattered. Bodies spun into the dark, their silver-blooded limbs frozen in grotesque, drifting sculptures. Anderson didn't look away. This wasn't cruelty. This was reciprocity. Inside the dying Vorthak ship, Gromnock's neural tendrils writhed in agony. The deck beneath him trembled, the vibrations traveling up through his armored boots and into his bones. His secondary heart pounded in sync with the emergency klaxons, their shrill pulses a death knell for his species' arrogance. He had been wrong, so catastrophically wrong. The human Harriman was still coming. Gromnock's sidearm felt pitiful in his grip. A tool for executions, not war. Not this kind of war. The human's armor was scorched, his left arm hanging limp, but his eyes. Those were the eyes of something that had already decided how this would end. Gromnock fired. The energy bolt struck Harriman's chestplate, searing a blackened scar across the composite plating. The human didn't stagger, didn't flinch. He just kept walking. His breath, a ragged rhythmic rasp through his helmet's filters. Then he lunged. Gromnock's world became pain. A fist crashed into his cranial crest, snapping one of the bony spines. A knee drove into his ventral plating, cracking the protective carapace. He tasted silver blood in his mouth, felt his neural tendrils recoil in shock. Humans weren't supposed to fight like this. They weren't supposed to win like this. Harriman's gauntlet closed around Gromnock's throat. The human's grip was iron, his fingers pressing into the soft, vulnerable flesh beneath the Vorthak's armored collar. Gromnock's vision darkened at the edges. The last thing he saw was the human's eyes. burning with the same fire that was consuming his ship. On the bridge of the Aegis Dawn, Anderson watched the Vorthak flagship's reactor core finally surrender. The explosion was beautiful. A sphere of plasma swelled from the wreckage, its edges tinged violet before the sheer heat bleached it white. The shockwave rippled outward, distorting the light of nearby stars for a single breathtaking moment. Then it was over. The void was silent again. Anderson leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The taste of victory was sharp on her tongue, metallic, like blood. The Vorthak had thought humanity weak. Now they knew better. She tapped a command into her console. The ship-wide comm crackled to life. "All hands," she said, her voice steady. "Prepare for retrieval, we're not done yet." Outside, the wreckage cooled. Inside, the fire still burned. The wreckage of the Vorthak flagship drifted in a slow, silent ballet of destruction, twisted spars of dark steel glinting violet under distant starlight, the remnants of its silver-purple energy cores flickering like dying embers. The Aegis Dawn hovered amid the debris, its own battle scars still glowing faintly from heat dissipation. Commander Rachel Anderson watched the aftermath through the reinforced viewport, her reflection a ghostly overlay against the carnage. She had expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt only the cold weight of inevitability. The Vorthak had come to annihilate, not negotiate. They had assumed humanity would break beneath their brutal, weaponized might, just as every other species had before. But humans did not break. They adapted. They retaliated. And when pushed to the edge, they did not merely fight back. They redefined the battlefield. A soft chime from her console pulled her from her thoughts. Corporal Richard Harriman's voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, we've got something." Anderson turned, her boots clicking against the deck as she strode to the tactical display. The screen flickered to life, revealing a distorted signal, an encrypted burst transmission, its origin point deep within contested space. Gromnock's last act. The Vorthak scientist had been desperate, but not foolish. He had known his ship was lost, and in his final moments, he had chosen defiance, not for his empire, but for himself. Anderson's fingers danced across the console, peeling back layers of encryption. The message unfolded like a blade being unsheathed. It was a plea, not from the Vorthak High Command, not from their warlords or their conquerors, from their slaves. A species the Vorthak called the Kessari. Small, fragile beings with no weapons, no armies, no means of resistance. They had been harvested, their world stripped bare, their people worked to extinction in the forges of the Vorthak war machine. And now, with their last breath, they begged for aid. Anderson exhaled slowly, the weight in her chest shifted, no longer the aftermath of battle, but the burden of choice. She could ignore it. The Aegis Dawn had done its duty. Humanity had proven its strength. There was no obligation to intervene in the suffering of strangers. But that was not the human way. She tapped the comm. "Harriman, prep a recon team, full stealth protocols." A pause. Then, "We going after them, Commander." Anderson's lips thinned. "We're not leaving them behind." The Vorthak had built their empire on the bones of the weak. Their fortress, ships loomed over conquered worlds like jagged monoliths, their silver-purple energy cores pulsing with the rhythm of forced labor. The Kessari toiled beneath them, their bodies broken, their will eroded. They had long since stopped hoping for rescue. Until the shadows moved, human operatives slipped through the cracks in Vorthak security, like smoke, silent, undetected. Their armor was matte black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Their weapons were not the brute force implements of Vorthak doctrine, but precision tools, neural disruptors, nanofilament cutters, viral subroutines that hijacked enemy systems from within. Harriman moved among them, his HUD painting the facility in cold, tactical blue. The Kessari were kept in pens, their skeletal forms barely visible in the dim glow of containment fields. One looked up, Their eyes met. For the first time in generations, a Kessari saw something other than cruelty in the gaze of a conqueror. Harriman activated his calm. "We've got live ones." Anderson watched the operation unfold from the bridge, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. The Vorthak had no idea what was coming. They still thought in terms of fleets and firepower. Humanity thought in terms of solutions, and sometimes the most devastating solution was not a warship, not a bomb, but a single act of mercy. The containment facility's primary comm array was a brutalist spire of silver-purple alloy, its energy conduits pulsing with the harsh rhythmic light of Vorthak military systems. It had been designed to relay orders, to coordinate suppression, to enforce silence. Now it would scream. Corporal Harriman's fingers danced across the alien console, his neural interface translating the jagged Vorthak glyphs into something his implants could parse. The system resisted, locked behind layers of encryption, biometric failsafes, and counter-intrusion protocols. But human hackers had spent decades dissecting captured Vorthak tech, and Harriman had trained for this. A final keystroke, the array hummed to life, its energy signature spiking as it bypassed local jamming fields and punched a signal straight into the void. Commander Rachel Anderson watched the data scroll across her tactical display. The transmission wasn't just a distress call, it was a record. Every atrocity, every experiment, every broken body in those pens, compressed into a single burst of raw data. No encryption, no obfuscation, just truth. The signal would propagate at light speed, bouncing off relay stations, bleeding into civilian networks, slipping past sensors like a whisper in the dark. By the time the Vorthak High Command realized what had happened, it would be too late. The galaxy would know. High Commander Vorgel's claws dug into the armrest of his command throne as the alert blared through the bridge. His tactical officers scrambled, their spines rigid with alarm. "They hacked us," Gromnock hissed, his voice a subsonic growl. A primitive species bypassed our Vorgul, silenced him with a gesture. His eyes remained fixed on the holodisplay, where the stolen data unfurled like a corpse on an autopsy slab. The Kessari, the experiments, the proof, his mandibles twitched. This wasn't just an attack, it was exposure. The Vorthak Dominion had thrived on fear, on the unspoken rule that none would dare challenge them. But humanity had just torn open the vault and spilled their secrets into the stars. Now the galaxy would remember what mercy looked like. Harriman didn't wait for the Vorthak response. He didn't need to. The Kessari were already moving. Their limbs were frail, their bodies broken by years of captivity, but their eyes burned with something he hadn't seen before. Recognition. One of them reached out, its skeletal fingers brushing the insignia on his armor. The gesture was soft, deliberate. "A thank you," Harriman nodded. Then he turned, raised his rifle, and prepared to hold the line. Anderson exhaled slowly as the first Vorthak warships broke orbit, their engines flaring violet as they burned toward the facility. Let them come. Humanity had already won. The Vorthak warships descended like a storm of blades, their hulls gleaming silver, purple under the dim light of the system's dying star. Their engines burned with the harsh, unnatural glow of Dominion military drives, efficient, relentless, designed for conquest. Commander Rachel Anderson watched them through the tactical display, her fingers hovering over the console. The Kessari facility was a ruin now, its once imposing walls shattered by human artillery, its halls echoing with the footsteps of freed prisoners. The Vorthak had built this place to be unassailable, a fortress of fear. And yet, here they were. Here she was. Anderson exhaled, slow and deliberate. The first wave of Vorthak dropships had already breached the upper atmosphere, their descent trails cutting through the sky like violet scars. They weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to salvage. They were here to erase, to wipe away the humiliation of their defeat, and the witnesses to it. Behind her, Corporal Richard Harriman adjusted his grip on his rifle, his visor reflecting the flicker of distant explosions. The Kessari survivors huddled in the makeshift bunker, their thin limbs trembling, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. But there was something else there now too. A defiance, one of them, an elder, judging by the deep-set scars across its carapace, lifted its head and met Anderson's gaze. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The message was clear. We will not run. Anderson turned back to the display. The Vorthak fleet was forming a blockade, their capital ships positioning for orbital bombardment. Standard Dominion doctrine, when faced with resistance, reduced the battlefield to molten glass. But this time, something was different. A single transmission cut through the interference, its encryption breaking apart under human decryption protocols. The voice that emerged was cold, mechanical, unmistakably Vorthak. Human vessel, you have trespassed upon Dominion sovereignty. You will stand down and surrender the prisoners, or you will be annihilated. Anderson almost laughed. She had expected threats, she had expected fury, but this was desperation. The Vorthak weren't just afraid of losing the Kessari. They were afraid of what would happen if the galaxy saw them bleed. She tapped a command into the console. The response was simple, a single data packet, unencrypted, broadcast on every frequency the Vorthak were monitoring. Inside it, every record of the facility, every scan of the prisoners, every shred of evidence that the Dominion had broken its own laws. And then, just for emphasis, Anderson added the last 12 minutes of Harriman's helmet cam footage, showing exactly how humanity had carved through their defenses. The silence that followed was electric. On the bridge of the lead Vorthak warship, High Commander Vorgel stared at the data flooding his screens, his mandibles twitching in barely restrained fury, his claws flexed against the armrests of his command throne, the dark steel groaning under the pressure. This wasn't just defiance. This was exposure. The Dominion had ruled through fear, through the unspoken understanding that none would dare challenge them. But humanity had just torn open the vault and spilled their secrets into the void. Now the galaxy would see. Gromnock, the Dominion's chief scientist, hissed from the tactical station. High Commander, we cannot allow this transmission to spread. The other client species. Vorgel silenced him with a gesture. The moment this data reached the outer systems, the Dominion's grip would unravel. The Kessari were just one species. But if the others realized the Vorthak could be beaten, that was an infection no amount of firepower could purge. Vorgel exhaled, the sound like grinding metal. He had a choice. He could attack. He could burn the facility to ash, kill every human and Kessari inside, and pretend this had never happened. He could do something far more dangerous. He could retreat. The bridge crew watched him, their spines rigid with tension. Vorgel made his decision. With a single command, the Vorthak fleet powered down their weapons. Their engines flared violet once more, not for attack, but for withdrawal. Anderson watched them go, her expression unreadable. Harriman lowered his rifle. The Kessari elder let out a sound, soft, trembling. Not a cheer, not a cry of victory, just a breath. Anderson turned to her crew. "Pack it up," she said. "We're going home." And somewhere, in the dark between the stars, the first whispers of rebellion began to spread. The Vorthak fleet folded back into the void, their silver-purple engines flaring like dying stars. The withdrawal was not a retreat, not truly. It was a recalculation, a reassessment of variables that had, until this moment, been deemed irrelevant. Vorgel stood motionless on the command deck, his armored fingers curling into fists. The silence was thick, oppressive. His crew did not speak. They did not dare. The weight of what had just transpired settled over them like a shroud. The humans had not fought them. That was the thought that burned in Vorgel's mind, hotter than any plasma lance. The humans had not needed to fight. They had simply stood there, unflinching, and in doing so, had unraveled centuries of Vorthak doctrine. He turned his gaze to the tactical display, where the human outpost still glowed, small, insignificant, yet now impossible to ignore. The Kessari were still there, huddled beneath that fragile dome, alive when by all rights they should have been reduced to ash. Gromnak, the scientist, approached. His spines were lowered in submission, but his eyes burned with something Vorgil had never seen in him before. Doubt. "High Commander," Gromnak said, his voice stripped of its usual certainty. "The fleet awaits your orders." Vorgil exhaled, the sound a metallic rasp. Orders. What orders could he give now? To return and finish what they had started would be to admit fear. To leave would be to acknowledge defeat. Neither option was acceptable. His gaze flicked to the data streams still pouring in from the human outpost. Their technology was crude by Vorthak standards. Yes, but it was adaptive. It had been designed not for dominance, but for survival. For persistence. That was the true horror. The humans had not built their weapons to conquer. They had built them to endure, and in that moment, Vorgil understood, the Kessari had called for help, and the humans had answered, not with overwhelming force, not with grand declarations of war, but with a simple, unshakable refusal to yield. It was a favor, one the Vorthak could not repay. On the surface, Commander Rachel Anderson watched the last of the Vorthak ships vanish into the dark. Her hands, steady until now, trembled faintly. She had not been certain this would work. Corporal Harriman lowered his rifle, his breath escaping in a slow, controlled exhale. "They're gone," Anderson nodded. For now, the Kessari elder approached, his thin limbs shaking, his large eyes glistening with something that might have been gratitude or terror. You did not fire a single shot." Anderson turned to him. "We didn't have to." The elder stared at her, uncomprehending. She didn't explain. Some truths were too heavy for words. Instead, she signaled her team, "Prep for evac, we're leaving." Harriman hesitated. "What about them?" He nodded toward the Kessari. Anderson's expression softened, just for a moment. "They'll be fine, because the Vorthak would not return, not to this place, not after today." The message had been sent, and the galaxy had heard it. Light years away, in the heart of Vorthak territory, the first whispers began. They started in the lower decks, among the engineers and the soldiers who had seen the human outpost with their own eyes. They spread through the barracks, the mess halls, the shadowed corners where dissent had never before dared to take root. The humans did not fear us. The humans did not break. And if the humans could stand unshaken before the might of the Vorthak Empire, what else might be possible? Vorgil felt it before he saw it. The shift, the fracture. It was in the way his officers hesitated before obeying. In the way the younger warriors looked at him, not with fear, but with questions. He could purge the doubters, he could burn the rumors from their minds with fire and discipline. But the seed had been planted, and seeds, once sown, did not die easily. Not even for the Vorthak. The humans, meanwhile, returned to their ships. They did not celebrate. They did not gloat. They simply left, because this had never been about victory. It had been about proving something, to the Vorthak, to the Kessari, to themselves, that some favors could not be repaid with blood. Some debts could only be settled with change. And change, once begun, could not be stopped. The war ended, not with fire, but with silence. The Vorthak Empire did not fall in a single, cataclysmic battle. It did not shatter beneath the guns of an enemy fleet. Instead, it crumbled from within, like a fortress eroded by the slow, relentless tide of doubt. Vorgil stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Conqueror, its silver-purple hull still gleaming under the dim light of a dying star. The ship was intact, the fleet remained, and yet something fundamental had been severed. His officers no longer met his gaze with the same unshakable certainty. The younger warriors, those who had witnessed the humans standing unbowed before their might, whispered in the corridors. They spoke of the Kessari, of the favor that had gone unpaid. They spoke of the humans who had walked into the heart of Vorthak power and walked out again, untouched. They spoke of possibility, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Gromnok, the scientist, had been the first to voice it openly. He stood before the High Command, his spine stiff with defiance, his voice steady, despite the death that awaited descent. We were wrong. The words hung in the air like a blade unsheathed. The humans were not weak. They were not reckless. They were, he hesitated, searching for the right term, efficient. A murmur rippled through the chamber. They did not fight us because they sought glory. They did not destroy us because they could. They came for the Kessari. They left when their purpose was fulfilled. Vorgil watched from the shadows, his claws flexing against the hilt of his plasma blade. He could end this, one swift strike, and Gromnok's heresy would be silenced. But he did not move because he knew, in the marrow of his bones, that the truth could not be killed so easily. On the other side of the galaxy, the humans did not rest. Commander Rachel Anderson stood on the bridge of the UNS Resolute, watching the starfield blur into streaks of light as the ship hurtled toward the next crisis, the next call for aid. The Kessari had been saved, but there were others, always others. Corporal Harriman, his armor still scarred from the battle, leaned against the railing beside her. "Think they'll remember us?" he asked, nodding back toward Vorthak space. Anderson didn't answer immediately. She thought of the way the Vorthak had looked at them, not with hatred, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous, understanding. "They'll remember," she said at last, "but not the way they expected." The first rebellion began on the outer colonies. It was small, disorganized, a single mining world refusing to send its tithes. The Vorthak High Command ordered it crushed. The fleet dispatched to enforce the decree hesitated. And then, for the first time in 1,000 years, a Vorthak warship lowered its guns. The Empire did not fall in a day, but the idea had taken root. The idea that there was another way. Years later, when the first Vorthak delegation arrived on Earth, they came not as conquerors, but as petitioners. They stood before the Human Council, their spines lowered in respect, their weapons left at the door. "We have come to learn," their leader said. And for the first time in their history, the Vorthak asked for a favor. Not with threats, not with blood, but with words. The galaxy would never be the same.